Welcome to the Healing H.A.C.K podcast. I'm Wilma Mae, your host. H.A.C.K stands for Healing, Abundance, Connection, and Knowledge, the core elements of real spiritual health. Join us as we explore ancient and modern tools, practices, and approaches for navigating a world that can feel fractured and demanding. You'll hear from experts across spiritual and healing modalities, as well as guests with powerful personal journeys. The goal is simple: to help you build a spiritual toolkit that actually supports your life. Let's begin. Hi, everyone. My name is Wilma Mae Basta, and I am the founder of a company called Sordoe. And one of our first products that we're introducing is Sordoe Intention Water. Now, Sordoe is a ritual splash. It's designed to support your spiritual health through very short but meaningful and impactful personal rituals. And I'm also the host of this podcast, which is called the Healing H.A.C.K. And H.A.C.K stands for Healing, Abundance, Connection, and Knowledge. And it's all about intentional living. It's all about connecting to ourselves and potentially and hopefully to something larger than yourself. I really wanted to share in this first episode a little bit why it means a lot to me to bring this podcast to you and explain a little bit of the thinking behind it. So this is about building your spiritual toolbox. A lot of folks don't consider themselves woo-woo or, remotely spiritual, but I often have conversations with people who are feeling disconnected, don't necessarily have the solution, have been trying, tools that have been around for a while, but aren't helping them anymore. And they don't necessarily feel that dipping their toes into anything remotely spiritual is going to be that helpful for them. So I have these conversations all the time, and I'm always amazed at how, when I start to break down how being spiritual, because just a little reminder, we are all of spirit. So we are all spiritual beings, right? And there's a very famous quote which says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So that's kind of how I consider myself, and having these conversations with folks who aren't really that connected to what they believe spirituality to be. It's always an interesting one. I never try and convince anybody that they should be doing this. But what I do find is that there's a sense of being disconnected, and that this is the way things are and this is the way they are, and that's just what it is. And so I start to share some of my story and what brought me to this, and some of the way that I was raised, and the times when I was very disconnected and broken down, and the times when I've been able to go into my spiritual toolbox, or even my mental health toolbox. I've got several toolboxes, and be able to actually be more resilient and, circle the spiritual bandwagons, as it were. So the podcast really is about inviting folks who are experts in particular modalities that you may or may not have heard of, or you want to dive deeper into. All of this to say that, this is meant to present things to you. It's not meant to say this is the answer, or, you should do this. It's just meant to spark your curiosity, and hopefully you go on a journey of discovery as to whether or not this is something for you and something you might want to add into your toolkit. By the way, one other thing is that I'm not just having experts on here. I am also inviting folks who have lived experience of what it is to connect to their own spirituality, who've been on their own journeys. And I thought that they might provide some inspiration for folks, because there are a myriad of people that I'm connected to throughout the world. And I always find people's stories really fascinating, and I glean important wisdom from some of their own experiences that I might incorporate into my toolbox. So I thought that I wanted to share that with you as well. So I'll give you a little background on me. I grew up on the main line of Philadelphia. I grew up in a place called Devon and then Villanova. And we were one of the very few Black families out there. Pretty much my mom raised us. And although my parents were amicable, my dad, for the most part, lived in the city. And I would see him, regularly. And my parents had a lot of love for each other, but they led separate lives. And my mother was the head of what's called a contacted mystery school. Now, I did not know what that was called when I was growing up, but a contacted mystery school is where the teacher who teaches some form of mysticism, because there are mystery schools and there are contacted mystery schools. So a mystery school, and I've said this before publicly on social media, that I joke when I say it's kind of like Hogwarts, but it's not for kids, right? Just very clear, not for kids. I was not in and learning about mysticism as a child, but it was around me and the rituals were around me and I was aware of it. And for me, it was normal, but obviously, it's not the kind of thing that you have the capabilities of talking about as a kid. And it's not the kind of thing that other people would understand. So my mother never really explained it all to me, but over the years and as I became an adult and understood a lot more, I understood that a contacted mystery school is where the teacher is contacted by entities from other planes of existence. And they are masters that teach through her. I remember hearing names like Master Shamara or Master Menelik and others. And that was really interesting to me. I always found that world fascinating. However, I did not choose to follow in my mother's footsteps. I wanted to be out in the world. It didn't seem super exciting to me, having grown up with it, mainly because I was like, I love fashion. I want to go move to New York. And I had lived abroad as a teenager. I was an exchange student in France. I think I was 15. And so that changed my life. And I knew that Europe was a place that I could feel at home. And I ended up moving to London in about 35 years ago in 1990. I was a student at NYU and I had been accepted to study abroad for 3 months and I never came back. And I built a life, I built a career, had a family, got divorced. Amazed, my ex is wonderful, amazing human, amazing father. And we are still very closely connected today, I'm very proud to say. And I remarried and had 3 more stepkids around. So it was this life that was not quite as traditional as many would see on the face of it. And I was still trying to figure myself out through my 20s. I had kids early, and then also in my 30s, and I struggled. I struggled with my identity. Who was I? I struggled at kind of fitting into this new life with a blended family. And I struggled as a mother. And how was I going to turn up as a mother? I mean, having the mother that I had, she was an amazing human and an amazing mother, right? She had 4 kids and she was doing all of the things. It was also the 70s. And I think that the idea of, you model yourself on your parents sometimes. And so that I was modeling on this amazing, strong, powerful woman who was this mystical, spiritual teacher, and not your typical stay-at-home mom or mom working or any of that stuff. So I struggled a bit with motherhood. And, well, more than a bit, I did. And I knew that I was kind of not understanding who I was. And I didn't know what my place in the world was. And about 15 years ago, that all came to a head, and I ended up incredibly depressed, seriously depressed, enough to be hospitalized. And I was hospitalized for about 6 weeks in London in a psychiatric facility. And I smile not because it was anything light It was really, really dark times. But I smile because it was both the worst thing that ever happened to me and the best thing that ever happened to me. I had this persona that I had my shit together. I did not have I thought I had that persona, by the way. I'm sure some people were like, no, we knew you didn't have your shit together. But I thought when I got into the hospital, and this is relevant, this is actually why I'm doing this podcast, but I thought I'd give you the history. So I'm sitting on the side of the bed as they checked me in, and this nurse comes up to me and he says, do you feel safe? And I was like, well, of course I feel safe. Looks like the Holiday Inn. Why wouldn't I feel safe? And that's when the penny dropped. That's when I went, oh my gosh, I feel so safe here. And I don't think I was in a safe environment, like an emotionally safe environment, which I don't think I was at the time. But I also knew there was other stuff going on. There was the way that I responded and reacted to things. There was the lack of boundaries that I had. It was all of my expectations of other people and lack of self-awareness in myself. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to be in a psychiatric hospital, let's do the damn thing. And let's do it well. And let's hold your head up high, as my mother always taught me to do. So I did. And then the rest of that year after I left the facility, I spent most of that time, because I was incapable of working. I was still very beyond fragile. I was raw, as if someone had peeled off all of my skin and it had to grow back. And I thought, well, I'm going to spend this time reading and exploring modalities, because for me, therapy wasn't really an option that I thought was really available for me, that would be really helpful for me. And the reason why is because my upbringing doesn't pattern match. I don't think a therapist that I could find, even one that was culturally competent, would understand this life that I led, which just I don't know how they were going to help me, basically. And also the other thing was, I don't know if I know how to articulate what's going on here for me. So I wanted to find other modalities that could scratch the surface and dig deep and really help me in a way that traditional methods might not be able to. All of that said, I am a big advocate for mental health. And during the pandemic, I started a mental health nonprofit called DRK Beauty Healing, which took off, and we were able to give away hundreds of hours of free therapy. And we had clinicians covering 60% of America as a response and mainly for women of color. And we had a huge response. And that's another story, another time. And the first series of this podcast was called The Healing Home. And it was focused more on modalities that were not quite in the mental health, but just kind of spanning. So now I've moved it, spanning both mental health and spiritual health. Now I'm focused mainly on spiritual health. And so that's why I renamed the podcast The Healing H.A.C.K, which I think I said before stands for Healing, Abundance, Connection, and Knowledge. So back to the story. I read a lot of books. I started seeing alternative healers and practitioners. I read several books by Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, who has her abbey in Nova Scotia. And she was transformational for me. If you look at some of my social media, you see I speak about her. She was a game changer because she helped me understand the patterns I was setting up for myself. The year before I went into hospital, I actually had done the Hoffman process, which I still believe is a really powerful tool. You can look it up, or I'll put it in the show notes. I think the Hoffman process is a game changer in terms of the work that you do on yourself. So I I started seeing a woman, and in my first series, there's a woman that I interviewed named Philippa Lubbock who does something called life alignment. That was something that was really powerful for me and really helped me a lot. So I kind of cobbled together a toolkit. I had no idea that's what one should be doing, but I realized that different parts of me need different types of healing, and it's not always the same. And there were some things that I still couldn't scratch the surface with. So that was that year. I spent time in nature, mostly on my own, because I needed to heal, and I needed to heal on my own. And by maybe about, I want to say about 6 to 7 months later, I had a strategy, and I knew I'd read so much and I had experienced so much with these different alternative healers. I needed like a day-to-day 3-point check-in. And so for myself, I said, okay, here are the things that I learned. I learned that I have too many expectations of people. I need to lower those. And I still needed to figure out, who do I have expectations of? Well, I thought, I have expectations of people I have contracts with, like employees. And I used to be a vintage fashion dealer around that time. And I ended up launching my shop and website soon after. And so I had employees. And then I had expectations of my husband because we had a contract. That was interesting. And then I had expectations of myself. I started to have expectations of myself for how I was going to turn up as a parent. I didn't have those expectations before. I had expectations of the children. And I realized that that wasn't the right way around for me. So I thought, okay, I have to get my head around not having expectations of them. The second thing was boundaries. And I decided that I needed more boundaries. I was trying to be not the bad person or not the person causing problems. And I thought I would let boundaries be breached because I didn't have them, but I needed them. So I sat for a long time and thought about what my boundaries should be. And I got very clear about how people come into my home and the level of respect that I require. And if they can't do that, I don't have any expectations of them to do that, but I do have those boundaries, and that becomes a boundary of whether one gets to cross the threshold of my home or not. That's an example of a boundary. So I started having those boundaries with friends, with family, with people I don't even know, with people that I work with. And the last thing, which I call it self-love. You can call it whatever, self-awareness, but self-love was the thing. And I realized for the first time that I was not showing my self-love. Didn't know why, but I needed to sit with that and think about it. And more than figure out the reason why I wasn't doing it, I just needed to do it. And so the first two, having boundaries and lower expectations of people, that when I put those into place and I implement them, that's showing self-love. That's a manifestation of self-love. So I started doing that every day, every situation. Are my boundaries in place? Do I have too many expectations of this person? By the way, I do have expectations of what one of my dear friends calls front row friends. And I have expectations of them, as they should of me, of how I'm going to turn up for them. Now, there are some friends that I don't have that expectation of, but might have that expectation of me. I had to get really clear about how that was going to work. And that's a whole nother podcast. And I had to be clear about the friends that no longer were on the same path or journey. And our friendship wasn't going to be helpful for either of us. But I had to be clear about what were my expectations of my front row friends, and do they know that I have those expectations of them? So that was a whole process for me to figure out that I needed to communicate that for those folks. So it's a whole thing, and I delved into it, bit by bit, and learned over the years how that turned out. So I got these three things that I could live by every single day, and within a year, and my mother used to have this saying, a year and a day. Give it time, a year and a day. I literally put a diary reminder in my calendar to check in with how has it gone this year. And my life had transformed, literally transformed. Everything that was dramatic, everything that was awful and just sad and upsetting and seemingly unsolvable became possible and solvable and beautiful. And the groundwork was laid for creating a beautiful life. And that was 15 years ago. We're now in 2025. And well, this is the end of 2025 when I'm recording this. And I am so proud, and I get a little tearful, and so grateful to say that my life is beautiful. My marriage is frigging amazing. I adore my husband, and we've now been together for 21 years. My relationship with my children healed, and with my stepchildren, and it took a lot of frigging work. Like, I did the work. I continue to do the work. And I see, and I bleat on to my kids about doing the work. And when you do the work and you go into the scary places and you do it with care and love and support, and you unpick and you work with it, there is so much beauty. There is so much. And it helps you to navigate the really tough times so that you don't completely fall down, that you go to your toolkit. You know, I had a situation recently where we had a fire in our apartment, and it was a small fire. It was an electrical fire, and I caught it quickly. A massive fire department turnout. It was very scary. I'd never experienced anything like that. Nobody was hurt, and that's the most important thing. And the damage was relatively minimal. Nothing was nothing irreplaceable was lost. And for that, I give thanks. But it did have an impact. And I thought right away, I need to mobilize my spiritual toolkit, my spiritual team, because I could already sense that there was some little bit of, I don't know if you call it PTSD, but there was definitely some anxiety that was coming up. And I now, through the years, I've learned about what anxiety is and how it turns up differently in different people. But I was like, right, I'm calling in my somatic healer. My friend does 5-element acupuncture. I'm calling him in. I started doing meditation classes with my son in person. I meditate every day, by the way, but doing it in person was a game changer. And I got some massages. And now all of these things aren't necessarily inexpensive things, just to say, but there are people around the world and in towns that do these things, both for that they charge for it, but there are people who do a certain amount, like we discovered with DRK Beauty Healing, like therapists giving away a certain amount of hours per year pro bono. So all of these things that I will be sharing with you, there are people out there that practice these modalities and will oftentimes donate some of their time or price it on a means-based level. But I threw all my stuff at it. I got my toolkit out. I'm like, right, let's try that. Let's try that. Let's try that. And so within a month, I got back to being grounded. I even was looking at somatic work one can do quickly on Instagram. And I found some amazing people, and I started doing some of the little practices, which helped. I had a big cry breakdown. My husband held me, and that was beautiful. So rather than keep it all inside, I found the safe places. I'm not saying that everyone has safe places to go to, but I'm here to actually share with you how to start cultivating the spiritual toolkit and support your spiritual health and help you cultivate that as well as personal ritual. So it's come full circle. And I really wanted to share this with the world, and this will evolve. I'm literally figuring this all out real time. but everything is from the heart and genuine. I really would love if you do enjoy this, that you like, you share, you comment, be polite, because I will block in a heartbeat. But I want to learn. I'm on this journey with you, okay? So I'm still learning. I'm still curious. I'm still ready to go and do the healing. I don't think for 1 second that I have done all the work. And what I find really interesting over time is that the work became really interesting to do, not scary. It was scary in the beginning. And then when I started seeing the results, I was like, oh, okay, I need to go and do some more work. What else is unhealed? So, for example, I'll do another episode around my experience with ayahuasca. I turned my nose up at it initially because I was like, I don't do psychedelics. That's not my thing. And then I got the calling and I decided to go do that. And it was literally a game changer, but it's not for everybody. And I don't recommend it, but I will share my experience. So we'll do that in an upcoming episode. Also, the work of being a woman of color in this world is something that I will also touch on, because I think it's important for communities of color, but it's also important for other communities to learn and understand about how we walk through this life. This podcast is for everyone, right? And I'm going to have people from all walks of life, all modalities, and some may be a little bit controversial, but again, I present these to you as things for you to either be curious about, to learn about, to explore, to deepen your understanding about, and have a starting point, again, going back to building your spiritual toolkit. So with all of that said, that is what I'm working on. This is the Healing Hack, and I really invite you to enjoy this podcast. Okay, that's it from me. Bye. Thanks for listening to The Healing Hack. If this conversation resonated, subscribe, leave a review, and share it. You can find me at The Healing Hack on Instagram. And for more on cultivating personal ritual in your life, and to discover the products we are creating to support that, follow Sordoe at Sordoe Official on Instagram and at Sordoe Rituals on TikTok. Until next time.